Daniel woke up to find himself tied up and kneeling in a dark room. His body convulsed. Then, his mouth opened and he began to vomit. At first, it was a trickle. Then, it came in waves. Gold coins, naira notes, wads of cash, fresh and crisp, spilled from his mouth like a never-ending waterfall. Daniel gasped, choking as the money poured out uncontrollably. The sight was horrifying. Money was gushing out of him like an unstoppable flood. His body trembled violently, his throat raw from the force of it. Tears streamed down his face as he gasped for air between the endless flow of banknotes. He was warned that something like this could happen, but he was too stubborn to see it. Just 2 days ago, Daniel sat on the narrow veranda of his one-room apartment, staring at the dark sky, lost in thought. The dim glow of his rechargeable lantern cast shadows on the cracked walls, and from a distance, the faint sound of a preacher's voice rang through a loudspeaker. "Come and receive your miracle tonight. The Lord is waiting to transform your life." The voice bellowed, piercing through the silence of the night. Daniel sighed. Lately, life had been dealing him blows from all angles. His tailoring business was struggling, and despite his efforts to attract more customers, things had only worsened. The frustration of seeing his peers' progress while he remained stagnant disturbed him. He had prayed, fasted, and done everything he was told would bring blessings, yet things only seemed to spiral further into hardship. As he sat there, the church's advertisement continued. "The Almighty will rewrite your destiny. Just one touch and your life will never remain the same." Daniel rubbed his face and exhaled. Maybe this was the answer he had been waiting for. The church, Divine Restoration Ministry, had become the talk of the town. Everyone spoke about the miraculous healings, the overnight financial breakthroughs, and the testimonies of people who had once been hopeless but were now living in abundance. Even his neighbor, Johnson, had started attending and swore his business had tripled in just 2 weeks. His girlfriend, Tara, had always been his voice of reason. "Daniel, just you need to be careful. Not every church is what it claims to be," she had warned him more than once. Tara was the skeptical type, always questioning the motives of pastors who made extravagant promises. But Daniel was desperate, and desperation made even the most skeptical person cling to any glimmer of hope. The next morning, Daniel made up his mind. He was going to Divine Restoration Ministry. Sunday arrived, and Daniel dressed in his best attire, a neatly pressed white shirt and black trousers. Tara, who had come to visit him, sat on the bed, watching him prepare. "You're really going, aren't you?" she asked in a concerned tone. Daniel smiled as he picked up his Bible. "Babe, I need a change. I can't keep living like this. Maybe this is my breakthrough." Tara folded her arms. "Daniel, I've heard things about that church. The miracles seem too perfect, too staged. Doesn't that bother you?" Daniel shook his head. "What matters is that people are testifying. I can't ignore that." She sighed. "Just be careful." "I will," he promised before kissing her forehead and heading out. The church was larger than Daniel had expected. A massive structure with bright neon lights displaying its name stood before him. The compound was filled with people, some kneeling and praying, others singing and dancing. The atmosphere buzzed with energy, and the choir's harmonized voices filled the air. As he stepped inside, an usher guided him to a seat near the front. The service was unlike any he had ever attended. The moment Pastor Mordecai stepped onto the stage, the entire congregation erupted in cheers. He was a tall, commanding man with an air of authority, dressed in an immaculately tailored white suit. His voice was deep and hypnotic, and as he spoke, people clung to every word. "You are here today because God has ordained a shift in your life," he declared. "You are not here by mistake. The enemies holding you down shall be disgraced tonight." The crowd erupted in loud amens. Daniel felt goosebumps rise on his skin. The energy was infectious. Then came the miracles. A blind woman claimed to see again. A crippled man walked. A businessman testified about how his debts vanished overnight. Daniel watched in awe. Was this truly the work of God? He wanted to believe it was. As the service was coming to an end, Pastor Mordecai suddenly pointed in his direction. "You, my son, stand up." Daniel's heart pounded. He hesitated, but the people around him urged him up. He stood, and the pastor smiled. "The Lord is showing me something about you," Pastor Mordecai said. "You are struggling. Doors have been shut against you. But listen to me. If you allow me to pray for you privately, your story will change within days." Daniel's eyes widened. The congregation cheered, and he felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. "It is your turn to testify," the pastor exclaimed. "Your life is about to take a new turn." Daniel nodded eagerly. He could hardly believe it. Had God finally remembered him? As he stepped out of the church, his phone vibrated. It was a message from Tara. "I hope you're safe. Please don't do anything reckless." Daniel smiled, shaking his head. "She worries too much," he muttered before heading home, happy about the service and the revelation the pastor shared about his situation. After the service, Pastor Mordecai sat in his dimly lit office, his fingers rhythmically tapping against the polished wooden desk. The air smelled of old books and burning incense, an aroma meant to create an illusion of holiness. But behind the fragrance, behind the thick, expensive curtains and the towering bookshelf filled with religious texts, lay a darkness he could never escape. He had not always been this way. There was a time when he had been just like Daniel, young, full of faith, and eager to serve God. But desperation had led him down a path he never imagined he would take. Many years ago, when he was struggling to build his ministry, he had been approached by a cult of powerful men who promised him unimaginable success. They told him that real power was not in empty prayers but in ancient traditional rituals. At first, he had resisted. He had tried to keep his faith pure. But as the years passed and his church remained small, as he watched other pastors rise to prominence while he struggled to pay rent, he had given in. The night he made his first sacrifice, something inside him broke. The wealth, the crowds, the miracles, they had all come as promised, but at a great cost. He was no longer his own man. He belonged to the cult. Every 3 months, he was required to make a sacrifice. Sometimes, it was a mere offering of animal blood. Other times, it was much worse. But the most powerful ritual of all, the one that sustained his church's supernatural aura, demanded something greater, a human vessel to bear the burden of wealth. And now, the time had come again. His fingers tightened around the armrest of his chair as he thought about Daniel. The moment he had seen him in the crowd, he knew. The desperation in Daniel's eyes, the way he longed for a breakthrough, it made him the perfect candidate. The cult had warned him that the next sacrifice had to be someone willing, someone who walked into the church on their own. And Daniel had done just that. A knock on the door startled him. He straightened his posture and cleared his throat. "Come in." The door creaked open, and Deacon Moses, his right-hand man, stepped inside. He was a stout man with piercing eyes that always seemed to see beyond the surface. "Everything is ready," Moses said in a hushed tone. "The room has been prepared. You just have to invite the boy, and when he comes, there will be no turning back." Pastor Mordecai exhaled nervously. "Good. Thank you, Moses. It's good to know I can always count on you." Moses gave a slow nod. "You're welcome, Pastor. We're in this together, you know that. By the time the ritual is complete, wealth will flow around us again like a river." Mordecai nodded as Deacon Moses left, but his hands were clammy. He had done this before, yet each time, the weight on his soul grew heavier. He had been warned himself long ago that he was simply a tool of the spirits, that if he did not obey, his own life would be the price. The cult did not tolerate disobedience. Mordecai leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes briefly. Tomorrow, Daniel would walk into his trap full of hope. By the time he realized what was going on, his fate would be sealed. The pastor opened his eyes and stared at the large gold-plated cross on his desk. Once, it had been a symbol of his faith. Now, it was nothing more than decoration. He picked up the cross and turned it in his hands. "God, forgive me," he whispered. But even as he spoke, he knew there was no forgiveness for a man like him. Back at home that evening, Daniel could hardly contain his excitement. Ever since attending the service at Divine Restoration Ministry earlier that day, he had felt something stir within him. It was as though his life was finally about to change. The service had been electrifying, the pastor's voice shaking the very air as he prophesied, casting out demons and calling down blessings upon the congregation. The words of Pastor Mordecai had stuck with him, echoing in his mind like a divine calling. Even now, as Daniel replayed the experience in his mind, a strange warmth spread through his chest. Tara's words, however, brought him back to reality. "This church doesn't sit right with me, Daniel. I don't trust that man." He laughed it off, accusing her of being too cynical. "Not every powerful pastor is fake, Tara," he told her. "Some men of God are truly called." She sighed in frustration, folding her arms. "Daniel, I know you want answers, but be careful. Not everyone who calls the name of God serves him." He waved her off, unwilling to argue. He believed he had found something real. So, when his phone vibrated that evening with an unknown number flashing on the screen, he hesitated only for a moment before answering. "Brother Daniel, how are you?" The voice on the other end was deep, commanding, yet oddly soothing. Daniel sat up. "Good evening, sir," he said quickly. He didn't need to ask who it was. He knew that voice. "The Lord laid you upon my heart after the service today," Pastor Mordecai continued. "I saw something in you, my son. The hand of God is upon you, and he wants to do great things through you." Daniel's breath caught in his throat. His heart pounded with excitement. "The pastor saw something in me." "Wow, thank you, sir," Daniel stammered. "I don't know what to say." "You don't need to say anything, my son," the pastor said with a chuckle. "But I do want to see you. There is a special prayer I need to conduct for you, something powerful. God wants to unlock certain doors in your life." "A special prayer?" Daniel's head spun with excitement. "When, sir?" "Tomorrow night. My house. It is not something we can do in church. Some prayers require privacy, away from distractions. Are you ready for your breakthrough?" Daniel's mind screamed yes. "I'm ready, sir," he said without hesitation. "Good," the pastor said. "Don't tell anyone about this meeting, not even your closest friend. The enemy moves in strange ways, and the devil can use even those we love to block our blessings." A slight sense of fear flickered through Daniel's mind. But before he could question anything, the pastor continued. "See you tomorrow at 8 p.m. God bless you." The call ended. Daniel could barely sleep that night. Thoughts of what the pastor had seen in him filled his mind. Was he destined for greatness? Could this prayer change his life forever? Despite the pastor's warning, Daniel felt uneasy keeping this from Tara. They told each other everything, and something about hiding it didn't sit right with him. The next morning, as they sat in a small restaurant eating jollof rice and fried plantain, he decided to tell her. "I'm meeting with Pastor Mordecai tonight," he said, stirring his food absent-mindedly. Tara paused mid-chew. "Meeting with him? Why?" "He said there's a special prayer he wants to do for me," Daniel explained, keeping his voice casual. "He said God revealed something about me." Tara frowned. "Where?" "His house." She dropped her spoon. "His house? At night?" Daniel sighed. "Tara, don't start. This is a good thing." She shook her head. "Daniel, something isn't right." "You always say that." "And I'm always right," she shot back. "Why can't he pray for you in church? Why must it be in secret?" Daniel rubbed his temple. "Some prayers require privacy." Tara scoffed. "Did he tell you not to tell anyone?" Daniel hesitated. Tara's eyes widened. "Daniel, please, don't go." He sighed. "Tara, I need to do this. What if this is my chance to receive God's blessings?" She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Fine. Do what you want. But if you don't pick up my call tomorrow morning, I'm coming to find you myself." Daniel chuckled. "You worry too much." "No, Daniel," Tara said quietly. "You trust too much." That night, Daniel arrived at Pastor Mordecai's house just before 8 p.m. It was a large compound with high walls, almost too grand for a simple pastor. A security man let him in without question. The air felt light and sweet as he stepped into the house. The bright security lights illuminated the entire compound, and a strong scent of burning incense filled the air. Pastor Mordecai emerged from an inner room, dressed in a flowing white robe. He smiled warmly, offering a warm handshake to Daniel. "Welcome, my son," the pastor said, placing a hand on Daniel's shoulder. Daniel forced a smile. "Thank you, sir. Are you ready to receive your breakthrough?" Daniel nodded. "Yes, sir." "Good," the pastor said. "Come with me." He led Daniel into a small room lit only by a single candle. At the center of the room was a wooden chair. "Kneel," the pastor instructed as he locked the door behind them. Daniel obeyed. Then the pastor began the prayers with a series of worship songs, holding a bell and a small calabash. As the singing progressed, he encouraged Daniel to clap his hands and pray with all his might. But suddenly, he started chanting in a language Daniel didn't understand. His voice grew louder, almost frantic. The air in the room grew colder. A strange dizziness washed over Daniel. His vision blurred. He tried to speak, but his tongue felt heavy. Then, everything went black. Daniel's last conscious thought as he fell to the ground was Tara's voice in his head. "Daniel, please, don't go." Suddenly, a heavy silence hung in the air. Daniel's head throbbed, his body stiff as if he had been trapped in the same position for hours. His eyelids fluttered open, but the moment he tried to move, a sharp pain coursed through his muscles. Something wasn't right. His knees pressed against the cold, hard floor. His hands felt numb, and when he tried to lift them, he realized they were bound together with a thick, rough rope. Panic surged through him. Where was he? The last thing he remembered was kneeling in Pastor Mordecai's prayer room. There had been singing, and then chanting, a dizzy spell, then darkness. Now, he was in a dimly lit space, the flickering glow of red candles casting eerie shadows along the walls. The scent of burning incense was stronger now, too strong. It made his stomach churn. Slowly, he lifted his head. The room was lined with strange markings, symbols drawn in thick, dark streaks across the walls and floor. A massive clay pot sat in the corner, filled with a bubbling, dark liquid that gave off a foul odor. The sight made Daniel's skin crawl. Something was terribly wrong. His breathing grew rapid as his mind raced. "Jesus, what is this?" Then, he heard it, low voices murmuring in the distance. Footsteps. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped in. Pastor Mordecai. Daniel's heart pounded. The pastor was no longer in the flowing white robe he had worn earlier. Now, he was dressed in a red garment with intricate black patterns. His expression was unreadable, with a darkness in his eyes that Daniel couldn't have imagined. Behind him stood two men, their faces concealed under black hoods. Daniel's lips trembled. "Sir, what is going on?" Pastor Mordecai didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked forward, placing a hand on Daniel's head. "You are blessed, my son," he said, his voice calm yet distant. "Tonight, you will become a vessel of wealth." Daniel's stomach twisted. A vessel of what? He struggled against the ropes. "Sir, I don't understand." "You will," Pastor Mordecai said simply. He turned to one of the hooded men and nodded. Daniel barely had time to react before he felt something press against his lips. A thick, bitter liquid was forced down his throat. He coughed and gagged, trying to spit it out, but strong hands held him in place. His vision blurred. His body felt lighter, weightless like he was floating. His mind drifted in and out of consciousness, but somewhere in the blurry haze, he heard the pastor's voice. "By the powers that govern the unseen, by the spirits of the ancient." Daniel's body shuddered involuntarily. He wanted to scream, to fight, but his limbs refused to obey. "We offer this soul in exchange for abundance. Let the rivers of wealth flow through him." A sudden, searing heat rushed through Daniel's stomach. His body convulsed. Then, his mouth opened, and he began to vomit. At first, it was a trickle. Then, it came in waves. Gold coins, naira notes, wads of cash, fresh and crisp, spilling from his mouth like a never-ending stream. Daniel gasped, choking as the money poured out uncontrollably. The sight was horrifying. The very thing people desired, money, was now gushing out of him like an unstoppable flood. His body trembled violently, his throat raw from the force of it. Tears streamed down his face as he gasped for air between the endless flow of banknotes. Pastor Mordecai and the hooded men watched in silence. Then, the pastor smiled. "It is done." The hooded men stepped forward, gathering the cash into a large sack. Their movements were quick and efficient, as if they had done this many times before. Daniel, still kneeling, could barely keep his body upright. His vision swam. His breaths came in ragged gasps. He tried to speak, to beg, to ask why, but all that came out was more money. His body was no longer his own. He was a tool now, a source of wealth. His stomach twisted as realization dawned upon him. He wasn't meant to leave this place. Terror gripped him. Would he die here? Would his body be discarded once they had taken all they needed? No. No, he couldn't let that happen. As he faded in and out of consciousness, vomiting more and more cash than he had ever seen, a single thought burned in his mind. Please, God, let Tara find me before it's too late. Tara barely slept that night. She had tossed and turned, an uneasy feeling settling deep in her chest. Every time she closed her eyes, her mind replayed her last conversation with Daniel. "I'm meeting with Pastor Mordecai tonight." Where? His house. A shiver ran through her as she sat up in bed, rubbing her arms absent-mindedly. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Daniel had promised to call her first thing in the morning, yet the sun had already begun its ascent, and her phone remained silent. She glanced at the phone on the bedside table, hoping it would light up with a message or missed call. Nothing. Her heart beat harder. This wasn't like Daniel. She reached for her phone and dialed his number. The first ring. No answer. The second ring. No answer. By the third attempt, a cold sweat formed on her forehead. She tried to calm herself. Maybe his phone is on silent. Maybe he overslept. But the sinister feeling of doom she felt refused to leave her. She knew Daniel. He wasn't the type to ignore her calls. Something was terribly wrong. She quickly wore a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, grabbed her bag, and rushed out of her apartment. If Daniel wouldn't come to her, she would go to him. Tara knocked on Daniel's door, tapping her foot impatiently as she waited. Nothing. She knocked again, louder this time. Still nothing. Her fingers tightened around her phone as she redialed his number. It rang endlessly, the sound only making her anxiety worse. A neighbor, an elderly woman who often sat outside her room in the compound, eyed her curiously. "Tara, my dear," the woman called. "Are you looking for Daniel?" "Yes, Mama," Tara answered, turning to her. "Have you seen him this morning?" The woman shook her head. "Not at all. He didn't come home last night." Tara's stomach dropped. This was bad. "Are you sure?" she pressed. "Very sure, my dear," the woman said. "I was outside all evening. If he came back, I would have seen him." Tara felt lightheaded. She staggered back, pressing a hand against her chest. Daniel hadn't returned home. She sucked in a deep breath. Where was he? Her mind screamed the answer before she could even process it. Pastor Mordecai. Tara ran at full sprint till she got to Divine Restoration Ministries church compound. Her hands trembled as she stood outside the church building. The church doors were locked, and the compound very quiet. She turned to a nearby food vendor. "Auntie, please, do you know where Pastor Mordecai lives?" The woman gave her a wary look. "Why are you looking for him?" "My friend was last seen with him," Tara said urgently. "I need to find him." The vendor hesitated, then gestured toward a street a few blocks away. "He lives in that big house with a black gate." Tara didn't wait for another word. She took off in that direction, her heart pounding. Pastor Mordecai's house loomed ahead, its high walls and black gate giving off a dark presence. Tara approached cautiously. She wasn't sure what she was expecting, but as she reached out and knocked, the security guard stepped forward. "Yes, madam, who are you, and what brings you here?" "I need to see Pastor Mordecai," Tara said firmly. The guard gave her a suspicious glance. "He's not seeing any visitors without an appointment today." Tara's jaw clenched. "I'm looking for my friend, Daniel. He came here last night." The guard's expression didn't change. "I didn't open the gate for any visitor last night." Her frustration grew. "I know he was here," she insisted. "Let me see the pastor." The guard's face darkened. "Madam, I've told you that you need to have an appointment to see him." Tara inhaled sharply, forcing herself to stay calm. She wasn't getting in this way. Fine. If the pastor wouldn't talk to her, she knew who would. The police. The officer behind the counter looked unconcerned as Tara explained the situation. "So, your boyfriend went for prayers and didn't return home?" he asked, arching an eyebrow. "Yes." Tara snapped, barely able to contain her frustration. "He told me he was going to Pastor Mordecai's house, and now he's missing." The officer sighed. "Madam, maybe he lied about where he went. He might be in a hotel room with another woman enjoying himself now." "That's not possible," she insisted. "Daniel isn't like that. Something is wrong, I can feel it." The officer exchanged glances with his colleague. "Look," he said, "there's not much we can do right now. He hasn't been missing for more than 24 hours, so..." Tara slammed her hand on the desk. "I don't care about your stupid rules," she said, her voice shaking with anger. "I'm telling you, something is wrong. If you don't do something now, it might be too late." The officer sighed again, rubbing his forehead. "Fine," he said. "We'll go with you to ask the pastor some questions." Tara exhaled in relief. "Thank you." The black gate swung open as two uniformed officers and Tara stepped into Pastor Mordecai's compound. This time, the security guard didn't protest. Within minutes, Pastor Mordecai emerged, dressed in his usual pristine white robe. He looked calm and concerned about their visit. "Ah, officers," he said, his voice smooth. "To what do I owe this visit?" The lead officer stepped forward. "We are looking for a young man named Daniel. His girlfriend here says he was last seen with you." Pastor Mordecai's face changed into an expression of sorrow. "Oh, dear," he murmured, shaking his head. "Yes, Daniel was here last night for prayers. Such a good young man." Tara clenched her fists. "Where is he?" Pastor Mordecai sighed. "After prayers, he told me he had been considering traveling for some time. He said he needed to leave for personal reasons." Tara's eyes widened. "That's a lie." The pastor placed a hand on his chest, looking deeply wounded. "My dear, why would I lie? He spoke of a journey, and I blessed him before he left." The officers exchanged glances. Tara's head spun. She knew he was lying. But how could she prove it? "Sir," the second officer said, "would you mind if we take a look around your house?" Pastor Mordecai chuckled. "Officers, surely you don't suspect me of wrongdoing?" "Sir, it's just routine," the officer replied. The pastor let out a small sigh. "Of course. But please, be quick." Tara's heartbeat raced. As the officers moved to inspect the house, she clenched her fists. She knew something was off. She just had to prove it. And she would. No matter what it took. One of the officers, Officer David, had been in the force for nearly 15 years. He had seen all kinds of cases, missing persons, kidnappings, murders, and even cases where people vanished voluntarily to escape debts or personal troubles. But something about this case unsettled him. The moment they stepped into Pastor Mordecai's compound, he had felt it, an unexplainable tension in the air. The pastor was too smooth, too composed. His words were carefully chosen, his expressions well rehearsed. David had dealt with many criminals who pretended to be saints. He knew the look of a liar when he saw one. David and his partner, Officer Lookman, took a quick glance at each other as they followed behind Pastor Mordecai as he led them through the house. The house was large but quiet. Too quiet. "This is my living room," the pastor said, gesturing to an elegantly furnished sitting area with cream-colored sofas and a large gold-plated cross hanging on the wall. "My kitchen is to the left. Would you like to see it?" Officer Lookman, who had been more skeptical of Tara's claims, nodded. "Yes, let's check it out." Pastor Mordecai led them into the kitchen, then the dining room, the guest rooms, and finally, his own bedroom. Each room was spotless, well arranged, and smelled faintly of incense. Nothing suspicious here, Lookman murmured to David. David wasn't convinced. Something was missing. If Daniel had truly been here, there should be traces of him. A misplaced item. A sign of struggle. Something. But everything was too perfect. His eyes roamed the room, searching for anything out of place. Then he noticed it. The door at the end of the hallway. It was small and concealed, but there was just enough sign for him to know it was an actual door. "Pastor, what's in that room?" David asked, tilting his head toward the door. Pastor Mordecai's expression didn't falter, but David noticed the subtle tension in his shoulders. "What room? I've shown you all the rooms in this house." "No, you haven't shown us what's in the room behind that small concealed door," David said, pointing to the door. "Oh, that." The pastor let out a small chuckle. "That is just my prayer room. It is a sacred place, officers." "A prayer room?" David repeated, stepping toward it. "Yes," Pastor Mordecai said quickly. "It is a place of deep meditation. I would rather not have outsiders defile it." David ignored him and pushed the door open. The air inside was thick, almost suffocating. The room was dimly lit by a single red candle, casting eerie shadows across the walls. And in the center of the room, kneeling on the floor, was Daniel. David's breath caught in his throat. The young man's eyes were vacant, his body trembling as he vomited wads of cash onto the floor. Blood-stained Naira notes. Tara's scream pierced the silence. "Daniel." She rushed past David, falling to her knees beside him. "Daniel. It's me. Can you hear me?" Daniel's lips trembled. His entire body shook violently as another surge of money forced its way up his throat. David reached for his gun. "Pastor Mordecai," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "what exactly is this?" Pastor Mordecai took a step back, his once composed face now clouded with panic. "Officers, I can explain." "Explain?" Officer Lookman shouted. "You mean to tell me this is normal?" "It was not my choice." Pastor Mordecai suddenly burst out, his voice shaking. "I was forced into it. The cult, they don't let you leave." David wasn't interested in his excuses. He grabbed his handcuffs. "Pastor Mordecai, you are under arrest for kidnapping, ritual practices, and attempted murder." The pastor made a sudden move, reaching for something inside his robe. David's instincts kicked in. Before the pastor could act, David slammed him against the wall, twisting his arm behind his back. "Try anything stupid and I swear, I won't hesitate to shoot," David growled. Pastor Mordecai whimpered as David secured the cuffs around his wrists. Tara sobbed as she held onto Daniel, who was still convulsing. "Help him," she begged. "Please, help him." David's jaw tightened. "Call for backup," he ordered Lookman. "And get an ambulance here. Now." The compound turned into a frenzy of activity within minutes of the discovery. More police officers arrived, swarming the house, searching every room for evidence. Journalists showed up, their cameras flashing as they tried to capture the shocking discovery. Daniel was carefully carried into the ambulance, still trembling, still vomiting money. Tara rode with him, refusing to let go of his hand. As David watched the ambulance drive off, he turned to see Pastor Mordecai being shoved into the back of a police van. The once revered pastor hung his head in shame. David took a deep breath. He had seen many Avilders in his years on the force. But this case? This was one he would never forget. By the time Pastor Mordecai was taken into custody, news of his arrest had already spread like wildfire. Social media was flooded with posts, pictures, and videos of his church, his house, and even his police mugshot. The great pastor famous for his miraculous works had been exposed as a fraud. As Officer David walked into the police station that evening, he knew Daniel wasn't the only victim. He couldn't be. How many others had suffered the same fate? How deep did the pastor's crimes go? And most importantly, was he working alone? David and Officer Lookman stood outside the interrogation room, watching through the one-way glass as Pastor Mordecai sat at the table, hands cuffed in front of him. His head hung low as he looked tired and overwhelmed with the whole ordeal. But David wasn't fooled. This wasn't remorse. This was fear. The kind of fear a man feels when he knows his secrets won't stay buried much longer. "Are you ready?" Lookman asked, adjusting his belt. David nodded. "Let's finish this." They stepped inside. Pastor Mordecai looked up slowly as his eyes met David's. "Officer," he said in a low voice, "I told you, David slammed a folder onto the table. "Enough with the lies." The pastor flinched. "We searched your house," David continued, his voice cold. "We found many things, Pastor Mordecai. Things you can't explain away." The pastor swallowed. Lookman pulled out a stack of photographs. He spread them across the table, one by one. Blood-stained garments. Ritual markings on the walls. Bundles of cash wrapped in black cloth. And worst of all, bones. Human bones. Pastor Mordecai's breath hitched. "We found this hidden beneath your church," Lookman said, tapping one of the photos. A shallow grave filled with human remains. The pastor's hands trembled. David leaned forward. "Tell us the truth. How long have you been doing this?" Pastor Mordecai opened his mouth but no words came out. He closed his eyes and took a deep, shuddering breath. "It wasn't my choice," he whispered. David clenched his jaw. "What does that mean? Explain yourself." The pastor's voice was barely above a murmur. "It started years ago," he said, his eyes distant. "I was a young man, desperate for success. I wanted to build a great ministry, to perform miracles, to bring people to God." David scoffed. "And so you turned to rituals?" Pastor Mordecai flinched. "I was tricked. When I started my church, an elder pastor approached me. He said he had seen my destiny, that I was meant for greatness. But to achieve it, I had to be initiated." David exchanged a glance with Lookman. "This elder pastor," Lookman asked. "Who is he?" Mordecai's lips trembled. "He is powerful," he whispered. "Even in prison, he can reach me. If I talk." "You're already finished," David cut in. "You're facing a lifetime in prison. You might as well tell us everything." Pastor Mordecai swallowed hard. His fingers twitched against the cold metal of the handcuffs. "He is Bishop Emmanuel," he finally admitted. David's eyes narrowed. "Bishop Emmanuel? Isn't he that well-known televangelist? The one who has a direct line to the president and top senators?" "It can't be." Or so they had thought. Lookman exhaled sharply. "This just got bigger than we imagined." As Pastor Mordecai exposed the can of worms, the door suddenly burst open and a junior officer stepped inside, looking flustered. "Sir, you need to see this." David frowned. "What is it?" The officer hesitated. "It's Daniel." David's stomach tightened. "What about him?" "He's missing." David shot to his feet. "What?" "He was in the hospital, recovering," the officer explained. "The doctors checked on him an hour ago. But when they went back, he was gone." Lookman cursed under his breath. David's mind raced. How could Daniel just disappear? Unless... David turned to Pastor Mordecai, his eyes cold. "Where is he?" The pastor shook his head rapidly. "I don't know. I swear." David's fists clenched. If Daniel had been taken, there was only one possibility. Someone didn't want him to talk. And whoever it was, they were powerful. How was it possible? The young man had been weak, barely able to stand on his own when he was rescued. And now, he was gone? David grabbed his phone and dialed the hospital immediately. "This is Inspector David. I need to speak to the doctor in charge of Daniel Green." A nurse responded after a brief pause. "Dr. Chinney is in surgery, sir. But I was on duty when it happened." "Then tell me everything you know," David demanded. The nurse hesitated. I don't know what to say, sir. One minute he was there, and the next, he was gone. We checked the CCTV footage, but something strange happened." David frowned. "Strange how?" "The cameras blacked out for just a few seconds, and when they came back on, Daniel was no longer in his bed." David's grip tightened around his phone. Someone had planned this. Someone powerful. His mind immediately went back to the name Pastor Mordecai had mentioned, Bishop Emmanuel. David stormed back into the interrogation room, his patience wearing thin. Pastor Mordecai looked up at him, his face weary. David slammed his palms on the table. Daniel is missing. Tell me where he is, now. Pastor Mordecai shook his head frantically. I don't know. I swear to you, I have no idea where he is. David studied him carefully. The man was scared, terrified, even. And for the first time, David believed him. Pastor Mordecai was just a pawn in a much bigger game. But if Daniel had truly been taken by Bishop Emmanuel or his people, then time was running out. David turned to Lookman. We need to move. Now. Lookman nodded. Where do we start? David exhaled sharply. We start with the bishop. That night, David and a team of officers raided Bishop Emmanuel's church. The megachurch was a massive structure, glowing under the city lights like a temple of gold. Thousands of people flocked there every week, believing in the bishop's divine miracles. But David had seen enough to know, miracles don't come from human sacrifice. The moment they stepped inside, they were met by a group of stern-faced security guards. One of them stepped forward. Officers, you cannot be here without. David flashed a warrant in his face. We have legal authority to search these premises. Now step aside. The guards hesitated, but one look at the heavily armed officers behind David, and they had no choice. The police stormed in. They searched the bishop's office, his private chambers, and every restricted room in the building. Then, in a hidden underground chamber beneath the church, they found him. Daniel. He was lying on the floor, his skin pale, his breath shallow. Strange symbols had been drawn across his body, and standing over him, holding a blood-stained staff, was Bishop Emmanuel. The bishop turned slowly, his expression calm despite the armed officers in front of him. Ah, he said in a smooth, deep voice. I see you have found us. David raised his gun. Step away from him. Now. The bishop sighed. Inspector, do you have any idea what you are interfering with? David ignored him and gestured to his men. Secure Daniel. Arrest this man. The officers moved swiftly, grabbing the bishop and pulling Daniel to safety. The bishop let out a low chuckle. You think you've won, he said, his voice eerily confident. David stepped closer, glaring at him. It's over. The bishop smiled. No, he whispered. This is only the beginning. The arrest of Bishop Emmanuel Chigozie shook the entire nation. News channels ran the story non-stop. 2 miracle pastors exposed as ritualists in 2 days. His congregation was in shock, refusing to believe the truth. Some even called it a government conspiracy, but the evidence was overwhelming. The remains found beneath his church, the symbols of his occult practices, the testimonies of those who had escaped, and most of all, Daniel. The young man was weak, but alive. And after weeks of treatment and prayers from real pastors, the vomiting ceased and he regained some of his strength. When he was strong enough to speak, he exposed everything. The rituals, the disappearances, the truth behind the so-called miracles. With Daniel's testimony, both Pastor Mordecai and Bishop Emmanuel were sentenced to life in prison. The scandal rocked the country, and many began to question the pastors they once trusted. Tara stood by Daniel throughout his entire ordeal, reminding him to never put all his hope in any pastor because of a large congregation or their power to perform miracles. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe for more. See you in the next video.